Good morning. Boker Tov, Guten Morgen. Hello, everyone. We have another song for you today. We've taken our shoes off because today's song is called We Are Walking on Sacred Ground. So, as you were invited yesterday, if you wish, I invite you to walk on the sacred ground. You may also want to stand and move with us as we sing. It's your choice. So, we're going to sing, starting here, and we're going to be, remember, we are walking, remember, we are walking, remember, we are walking on sacred ground. So 3 times remember, and then we are walking on sacred ground. So the first time goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, we are walking, remember, we are walking, remember, we are walking on sacred ground. Remember, we are walking, remember, we are walking, remember, we are walking on sacred ground. So there is a second part to this song, which will be sung on this side, which will go like this. Remember, 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 remember. Listen. We are walking on sacred ground. Let's sing the last line there together. We are walking on sacred ground. So you can choose. It doesn't have to be only this part, this side, only this part. You choose which part you like. So let's do this one more time. Translators, I know the translators are listening. I just want to be sure we translated, remember, we are walking on sacred ground, and make sure everyone's got that in their own language too. Yeah? So we have, remember, 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 we are walking on, let's carry on there, this side, remember, we are walking, remember, we are walking, remember, we are walking on sacred ground, on sacred ground, we are walking on sacred ground, we are walking on sacred ground, on sacred ground, we are walking on sacred ground, we are walking on sacred ground, we are walking on sacred ground. Oh. Thanks to the Faiths in Tune musicians. They just learned that. Thanks all. Have a beautiful day.
Esteemed religious leaders, good morning. Welcome to Plenary 3. This is advancing shared well-being by promoting just and harmonious societies. And it is our honor to invite on stage Ms. Isabel Shayani. She's a prominent journalist with WDF and also the panelists on stage. Welcome, Ms. Shayani.
Dear delegates, esteemed representatives, eminencies, excellencies, friends, and as you say here, brothers and sisters, before I start, I would like to ask the other panelists to join me, otherwise I feel so very lonely here. So Mr. Bartsch, Archbishop, His Excellency the Mufti, and Mrs. Gandhi, would you kindly join me? Genau. Yeah, right over here. That's fine. Just a short remark before we start this conversation. You know, you have been in Germany now for 3 or 4 days, and Germans do not tend to exaggerate. We sometimes seem to be very stiff, while, for example, Iranians, I'm half Iranians, they would say, I will sacrifice my life for you. Germans would say in this situation, they would just jump and save another person's life in case of emergency rather than saying this sentence. So in a very German way, I would like to tell you this. This is one of the most beautiful gatherings I can imagine. Because you are all so diverse, you are so vivid, and yet you are so united. As a Baha'i, I have this compass in my pocket with a quote from Baha'u'llah saying, the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens, and here you are, all gathered, you are mankind and obviously its citizens, very peacefully, and you look so beautiful that one sitting up here and having been here yesterday is really overwhelmed. Thank you for being here. Advancing shared well-being by promoting just and harmonious society. That's the title of our panel today. It's, of course, an easy job to do. And we are honored to start with Mr. Dominic Bartsch, who is the representative of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Germany. Before he came back in 2018 to Germany, he served for the UNHCR and for the UN in many different countries. I was impressed by all those countries, so I'm going to tell you which ones they are. Trinidad and Tobago, Switzerland, Geneva, Zambia, Kenya, Afghanistan, New York, New Delhi, and Iraq. I wonder how you can do that in one life. And apart from that, he studied international relations when he was studying close by in Konstanz, which is also a city close to Lindau. So please give Dominic Bartsch a warm welcome.
Distinguished faith leaders, dear delegates, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I will welcome the stranger. My faith teaches that compassion, mercy, love, and hospitality are for everyone, the native-born and the foreign-born, the member of my community and the newcomer. This may come across like my profession of faith, but actually it is yours. This is from the Affirmation of Faith Leaders in 2012-13, which many of you were affiliated in drafting and which I understand was formally endorsed by Religions for Peace at the last assembly. This short quote encapsulates that which connects our two worlds, the world of refugee protection and the world in which you as faith leaders influence, shape, and guide communities. We are governed and we are driven by the concern for the individual who may be an outsider and who needs protection. All major religions value systems, embrace humanity, caring and respect, and the tradition of granting protection to those in danger. The principles of modern refugee law have their oldest roots in these ancient texts and traditions. The Christian commandment, love thy neighbor. The Holy Quran calls for the protection of the asylum seeker, al-Mustamin. And Buddhism knows the concept of karuna, the qualities of tolerance, non-discrimination, inclusion, and empathy for the suffering of others. Protecting the stranger, the principles of modern refugee law are all rooted in the major faiths. But let us ask ourselves, how well are we doing in practice? And if we take as our standard the just and harmonious societies, I think we will come to the conclusion that the world as it stands today is not doing so well. There is civil strife in many, many countries. Conflicts are carrying on, some virulent, some as low-grade conflicts for many decades. They're becoming more protracted and entrenched. And where there's conflict, there are refugees. It is no surprise that the Track 2 consultations you've been having this week concern many countries that are also large refugee-producing countries. Myanmar, South Sudan, the DRC, and perhaps most tragically, the Central African Republic. The presence of refugees is one of the most visible indicators that societies are not just and harmonious. Refugees fled to seek protection for fear of persecution in their own country on grounds of their ethnic belonging, their religious belief, or their political affiliation. The fact that refugees exist are a sign of our collective failure of the international community to uphold peace and security, the failure of civil society, states, and perhaps also faith to promote peace and justice and harmony. But the reverse also holds true. Wherever refugees are prepared to go home and make the journey back into their communities of origin, there is an indication that just and harmonious societies have been restored. When a war has ended, when peace and justice have been restored, when there's no longer persecution, refugees feel safe to go back because the reasons that prompted them to flee have disappeared. They return home. My UNHCR colleagues, all 16,000 of them, wish for nothing better than to work themselves out of a job. For when we witness the joy of a refugee being a refugee no more, we have done our job. I myself had the privilege very early on in my career to support the 1.2 million Mozambican refugees to go back home after a civil war that lasted for 20-odd years. And that indeed is a great joy because we have solved a major refugee crisis. If I look at the many areas in which our two worlds interconnect, the world of refugee protection and the work of faith-based agencies, I want to highlight 3 areas in particular where I believe the need for close collaboration is greatest. The first one is conflict prevention. And that is the stage even before refugees are forced to flee. That is the point in time when societies are undergoing tension, when there is ethnic strife, when there is confrontation in society, and when What is most needed is dialogue, is reconciliation, is community-based work to try and reduce tensions and to ensure that the country does not follow a track that leads to outright conflict and ultimately the fact that people need to seek protection elsewhere. The second area is in countries of asylum, when it has happened and refugees have fled into another country. Here, faith-based agencies play a paramount role in dealing with the challenges that refugees experience to integrate themselves into the host society. In many situations, refugees can count on the generosity of the host population. Look at Uganda. The people of North Uganda have embraced more than 1 million refugees from South Sudan without questions asked. There are other societies where the presence of refugees causes tension, causes friction, fuels xenophobia, and leads to exclusion. And here too, specific efforts are required to overcome these tensions and to help refugees connect with the host society and integrate themselves. And the third dimension is on return. I mentioned the solution of the refugee crisis, namely return back home. And with that return, not all problems are completely resolved. Think of a situation in which a returning refugee has to encounter his own countrymen who have chosen to stay. Think of the difficulties we face in current-day northern Iraq, where some of the internally displaced are trying to go back to their homes in the Nineveh plains, only to realize that the makeup of their villages has changed completely, that the very mixed and heterogeneous community they used to live in has now changed and has become perhaps more hostile. Here too, community reconciliation, dialogue, support to help reduce tensions between returning refugees and the community is called for. In all these three areas, we need continued dialogue. We need reconciliation, reaching out, and a sustained engagement. We need to help mend society where it is hurting. As UNHCR, we have, I believe, made great strides in structuring our relationship with faith-based agencies. And I'm very pleased to recognize my colleague, who is the first interreligious coordinator I have come across in my agency and who is here today with us. We have, in 2012 and 13, developed clear partnership principles: hospitality, respect, and equality. But let me add a fourth principle to this, perhaps something we want to consider for future deliberations, namely the principle of solidarity. Because almost all religions have solidarity as a value they pursue. They realize that man is not an island unto himself, man is part of a community, and community needs to support the individual. This notion of solidarity we encounter very often in refugee situations. I've spoken of North Uganda, but indeed almost all refugee crises are managed because of the notion of solidarity in the host community. But among states, the notion of solidarity is somewhat reduced. If you look at the world, out of 190 plus states, only 46 are actively involved in supporting refugees, be it as host countries because they have accepted large numbers of refugees, or be it as donors who provide financial support to sustain refugees. And this solidarity is an essential piece to maintain refugee protection in the world, especially at a time when walls seem to become a new choice of policy for the defense of national interest. Refugee protection can only work when states collaborate, when states also share the burden. And it is with this in mind that the international community crafted the Global Compact for Refugees. And here too, I'm pleased to confirm that faith-based agencies made a very active contribution and supported the deliberations. This Global Compact for Refugees is meant to provide more direct support to the countries of asylum, to the big countries around the Syria situation, Jordan, Lebanon, to the countries around South Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, to the countries around Myanmar, primarily I'm thinking of Bangladesh, to the countries around Afghanistan, and here I'm thinking Pakistan and Iran. These countries cannot be left alone carrying the burden of a large presence of refugees, and the international community has to provide further support to share that burden. In this context, too, faith-based agencies play a very critical role, both in terms of advocacy, how you portray a refugee situation, but also in terms of providing concrete and tangible support. In 2012 and 13, we went through a first compilation of best practices, how faith-based agencies support refugee response. From the early stages, from the emergency response, when the agencies are not even present on the ground yet, and it is often church communities that provide emergency assistance. To what we call direct protection, support to protect people of concern. And I'm thinking here of examples from the Central African Republic, where a Muslim community chose to block a road in order to prevent an attack from a rebel group. A very daring posture they had taken at that juncture. And there are many examples. SGBV, the prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, many faith-based agencies help through their endorsement of our guidelines to reach the people in need and to make sure that such critical humanitarian standards are disseminated. The conversation between a secular agency like UNHCR and faith-based agencies is not always easy. Sometimes it is to do with language because we refer to values differently. Sometimes it is to do with self-perception. I want to give you one example of this. You talk about values like the respect for human life and dignity, which is integral to any religion, to any faith. In our context, we take a more operational phrase of that same value. We apply this in the context of rescue at sea, the situation in the Mediterranean we are all witnessing. We apply this in the context of combating racism and xenophobia. I'm very much looking forward to Mrs. Gandhi talk about the situation in South Africa. And we're talking about this in the context of promoting access to justice. So here I want to connect this with an encouragement and an appeal to you all to also not shy away from seeking to approach international organizations like UNHCR and the partners we work with, the NGOs we work with. This dialogue should continue to happen at all levels. It is very encouraging for me that interfaith dialogue makes such a strong appearance at this conference here in Lindau, but also on the ground in the many communities where you send a very powerful signal to the world that a just and harmonious society is an attainable goal, despite the growing polarization we are witnessing and the increasing exclusion of marginalized groups. And when the number of refugees in the world eventually starts to go down, then we will know that we are on the right track. Thank you.
Mr. Bartsch, you talked about a lack of solidarity. How would you describe the situation in Germany during the last 4 years? Did the religious communities, the faith leaders, did they show solidarity? Did they give a support? Or would you say, no, we were mostly left alone? How would you describe that?
In the context of Germany, I believe the churches and indeed many community-based faith organizations came to the fore, and they were part of what you may have understood as the welcome culture, the Willkommenskultur here in Germany, which initially provided for very, very positive and welcoming reception to the people who arrived in 2015 and 16. However, to sustain that very open and tolerant posture has become difficult. And in fact, in many church communities, there is discussions. There is also questions being asked by the members of those church communities, and there's a constant dialogue. We believe that the support amongst the German population is still there. However, there are a growing number of Germans who have questions, who want to discuss their own involvement, who also want to engage in a political discussion about the future protection regime.
So did I get you right? There is a lack of solidarity right now from religious communities here in Germany. Did I hear you right?
I think right now is a time where also religious communities have to come out very strongly and defend the values that underpin both faith and refugee protection.
If you were translating this, how would you translate this if I was a faith leader, which I'm not, but if I was to say something, what would help your work?
In our experience, the one thing, and it sounds so simple you will shake your head, but the one thing that really helps is to invite people to just have a conversation with an asylum seeker or a refugee, to just spend a few minutes to listen to his story, to try and understand. One of the big challenges that we see in society is that we spend way too much time talking about refugees rather than talking with refugees.
So, So that's pretty simple. I mean, that's way too simple. We've had so many conversations in Germany going on since 2015, and still we have this backlash now. So is it that simple?
I mentioned this particular point because in a society that is slowly becoming more and more polarized, I think it's important to remind ourselves of those simple truths. In reality, of course, the discussion that we're having is more complex and also factors in many other considerations. And indeed, we would call on religious faith to support that dialogue and not stand on their side.
So last question to you before we move on to Mrs. Gandhi. You were talking about dialogue and the need of a dialogue to prevent conflicts for the countries of asylum and also when it comes to returns. What do you exactly mean by dialogue? How should that function? Where should they sit? How many should enter the room? What is your idea when you talk about dialogue? Or did I get that wrong?
Dialogue, in our experience, really has to happen at all levels. There's one dialogue, if you will, at an institutional level, but there is, much more importantly, the dialogue on the ground, in the community itself. And this dialogue is very often shaped by the community leaders, by the faith-based leaders that are in the community, in the village, in the town, in the area. And here, in our experience, it is very important to remain open-minded, not to defend an institutional posture, but to be sure that all members of this community are involved, that we are not falling prey to a delineation, that we are not excluding people. One of the concerns, and we may be speaking about this later, from the perspective of an international organization is, of course, that many faith leaders would, in the first instance, come to the aid of their members, of their community members, whereas a secular organization like UNHCR looks at persons in need irrespective of their creed, irrespective of their ethnicity, irrespective of their political belief. And there too, I think we need to continue to work with community-based leaders to explain that distinction and to find good ways to work together and to foster that dialogue I mentioned.
Thank you. May I say that Ella Gandhi is not just from a prominent, but also from a very inspiring family. She asked me to introduce her shortly. I'm afraid I cannot do you this favor. She's the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi. She's born and raised in South Africa. She's been a member of the South African Parliament representing the ANC for 10 years. She used to be a social worker, so she also knows society and reality pretty well. During apartheid, she was banned from political activism and was put under house arrest for 9 years. And after serving in the parliament, she developed a program against domestic violence. Of course, Ella Gandhi has received multiple rewards, and now she will talk about this program, Overcoming Violence Against Women. The floor is yours, Mrs. Gandhi.
Thank you very much for that, and eminent delegates here, brothers and sisters, and young people, the youth who are here today. I greet you this morning. Good morning. Sorry. I mobilized a group of women when we started the domestic violence helpline, and to address the problem which we saw as a major problem in our area, and I think it's a worldwide problem of domestic violence and violence against women. We identified about 25 concerned volunteers, both men and women of different faiths, and it was very important to get the faith groups together, because when violence doesn't look at one particular faith, it affects everybody across the board. And therefore, it's important to have the people who are trying to help to be also of different faith groups. So our group was multi-faith, and we felt that it was important to firstly raise their consciousness about what was happening. So in the process of understanding what domestic violence and what violence against women actually meant, what we realized is that we became conscious of the stereotypes that we all have within us. We all understand domestic violence in our own ways, and we have certain stereotypes. For instance, that the woman was to blame for the violence that happened against her. Maybe she didn't dress up properly, or, those are some of the things that seem to be the factors that determine how we look upon violence against women. We also then gained a more scientific, evidence-based insight into the problem. We then decided that we needed to have further training on how to assist the women. We obtained training on counseling, techniques, understanding the laws that apply to situations of violence against women, and the procedure that needs to be followed. We learned all this by workshops and by serving as volunteers in the courts, in the shelters where the women are sheltered, and through listening to the stories of the women. The training exposed us to what happens in these courts, what happens in these shelters, and what happens in the homes. And this really made us much more conscious of all the constraints that women go through. It's not just the violence, but the secondary violence that happens in the courts, in the police stations, and in these shelters. So to change this, we made contact with the key players, and that is, we went to the police station. We called people from the police services, from the hospitals, from the courts, and from the welfare organizations. And we told them what we had learned from discussing things with the women and from the insights that we have gained by observing at all these places. And so they became conscious, and by making them conscious, they changed their attitude to the women in the future, hopefully. Not all of them change, but some of them do. So that one of the points that I want to make is, if you are trying to address the issues of violence in your area, you need to bring them together. Firstly, conscientize yourself, then conscientize all these role players, and then make sure, monitor that they are implementing their responsibilities in the best possible way. So we identified some important observations, and one of them was that abuse within the family often starts with breakdown in mutual respect between the two parties and use of offensive language. So that is the first point of breakdown. It's use of language. It's not necessarily physical violence that is the first point. But often women believe that it is their own fault. They believe that it's their own fault that the husband or the partners abuse them through offensive language. And so they feel that maybe things will improve. And sometimes after beating a woman once, the husband does feel remorseful and changes his behavior. But very soon after that, more violence occurs, and we have seen this in practice. So it doesn't just stop at that first point. Sorry. Thank you. Indeed, what we found is that the abuse gets worse and worse each time. And so when the women seek assistance, it's not because they sought assistance or that they told somebody else and broke the silence that they were assaulted badly, but because they were silent that they were assaulted badly. They didn't go and seek help. So all of us, and particularly religious communities, we found that in many, they themselves discovered this, that very often they would encourage the women to go back home. And by encouraging them, sometimes it became fatal. Some women were badly maimed, some women were killed. So we need to understand that aspect, that sometimes a short separation or a separation whilst both parties gain some counseling helps to change the situation. It can't change if you force the woman to go back. It has been found that the number of incidences of domestic violence reported, only a few end up with successful prosecution. So in many cases, when they go and report them, they are not convicted. The people are not convicted. Often this happens because there is a delay in actually reporting the matter. Often it's because they don't have sufficient evidence to prove that they were beaten up or that they were raped or whatever the violence was. And because they are not able to prove that, the conviction doesn't actually take place. And so there is no deterrent for people who perpetrate violence. We can all be encouraged that Religions for Peace is already planning a pilot project in several states that will involve distributing an ingenious DNA rape kits that can become evidence for prosecuting the crime of rape. This is something new that has been devised. Information on this deeply important initiative will be shared in an Angora market of ideas session at this place. I encourage all of you to learn more about this important initiative, which could and would, I think, enable women to provide the evidence that is crucial for conviction. I certainly believe that these needs need to be more widely publicized and distributed, and its effectiveness measured. So I hope that we all will participate in this and learn more about it. The experience in providing this service gave us, the domestic violence service, gave us further insight into more structural problems that occur within the communities. One of them is the need to understand and transform the entrenched belief system about the role of women, to understand the position of women, the insecurity and helplessness that she suffers when she is totally, financially, and physically dependent on her husband or a male counterpart. I think I'm going too far. Okay, I'll just round up by saying that I think that it is important for us to deal with the patriarchal nature of our society. And this is where men and women, people of religious convictions, and everybody needs to get together in order to change the perception that we live with for so many millions of years in our society, which has brought us to a position where all of us believe that women have to do certain things and men have to do certain things. The day we begin to think of ourselves as partners, men and women as partners in society who are doing things together rather than as different people, I think society will change. So,
Mrs. Gandhi, just some short questions. When you say one should bring community together and talk about this issue, my experience here in Germany is, well, when you say we talk about domestic violence, almost nobody will show up. So how do you tackle this issue? What do you say? What are you going to talk about when you invite communities? How do you sell it?
okay, the first thing is that it's not just domestic violence, it's violence. And if you say it's violence in our society, because this is part...
You say violence.
Yes, just say violence.
Just say violence.
Because sometimes the men say that they also are violently treated. So it is violence against everyone. It's a violent society that we are dealing with.
And when you have your groups and your workshops, the people who support you and who work with you, is it men and women? Is it both, or is it only women?
Well, we have to encourage. It doesn't usually happen, but we, in our domestic violence helpline, made sure that it was men and women. And we trained both men and women, and the training raised the consciousness of both the men and the women on what domestic violence is all about, or what violence is all about.
And when it comes to victims, it's still men and women who deal with this issue? Yes, both.
It is quite a few men have come out in our, because we have a hotline, the men also come, and they are also sometimes assaulted, physically assaulted. In some instances, men assault, and then they feel remorseful and they come for help. And this is very important because when they come for help, they can change. When they don't come for help, they will not change and they will remain as perpetrators of violence. It is important to recognize.
My last question at this point would be, did you in South Africa get certain support from religious communities that would be a positive example for the others here?
Yes, we did. Within our area, we got a lot of support from the different religious groups.
Like what?
And, well, they came in, they, participated in our programs. So they were able to become more conscious of the domestic violence. Some of them have formed, we have a thing called the Policing Forum.
The what?
Community Policing Forum.
Policing forum?
Yeah. So every police station has a community policing forum in which people from the community participate. And often it's faith-based people and so on, community organizations, NGOs, and so on, participate in this forum to give support to that police station and also to give assistance to victims of violence and so on.
So I'm not sure if I got this right. It means that religious communities support the police and are, so to speak, in German we say Hilfs-Sheriffs. They are kind of little sheriffs or little police, so civil society is doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
We have a legal position in South Africa where we have in every station, all over South Africa, we have a community policing forum. And women and men both participate in that. We also have women's groups and sometimes faith-based organizations as well who go to the courts. When there is a case being heard, they go to the courts and support the victim.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gandhi. We now have a look at Uganda. Sorry, I have to show my back to you. Yesterday, I talked, I think, to 3 or 4 people from Uganda. And to tell you the truth, I was really shocked. They were all so positive. So whenever they talked about Uganda, you all had shining eyes. And I thought, okay, what is going on in Uganda? We have to talk about this. What civil process is going on, and especially what about the relationship between the different religions? So it seems to me, and this is, I think, also a reason why the 2 of you are here up on the stage, that it could be that you are already ahead of us and that you're already living a kind of future that could be an example for the others and for other countries. So we are really curious, or I'm really curious to learn about your experiences on the so-called national dialogue. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it tells a lot about how a Muslim and how a Christian leader talks to politicians and also to his own communities. So we will talk with His Excellency, Sheikh Shaban Ramadan Mubaji, sorry. Sorry if I'm, but Excellency is right? Eminence, oh God. Okay, let me start again. So, His Eminence, Sheikh Shaban Ramadan Mubaji. I hope you don't mind if I just say Sheikh Shaban. Okay. Wir duzen uns, wir beide. He has been the elected Mufti of Uganda in 2000 and is the elected Mufti ever since. He's born in Bungoko district. Bungoko sub-county. You can correct me better that way. He studied several things, but apart he also studied Sharia law in Saudi Arabia. He was a Qadi, so a judge in Mambala district. And he is convinced, which you said somewhere, that Muslims should be peacemakers. He's the current chairperson of the Inter-Religious Council in Uganda, and he is the co-chair of the African Council of Religious Leaders, the ACRL. In Uganda, you are witnessing, this is what I understood from the conversations I had in advance, an exciting civic society process. It's called the National Dialogue. So I'd be glad, and we'd be glad to hear what this is all about. Where are you going? Ah, okay. Okay, but let's be clear, although you stand there, it's 7 minutes. We can't make it more.
No problem with time. Thank you, moderator. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of the Almighty God, most gracious, most merciful. First and foremost, let me thank our moderator. But let me begin with what the first panelist ended with, and that is the influx of the refugees from South Sudan to northern Uganda. Northern Uganda was once a war zone for about 2 decades. The war waged by the so-called Lord's Resistance Army, headed by the Joseph Kony, who purported to be a Lord's messenger representing God and fighting in the name of God. But as we talk now, joining the efforts of the local religious leaders who came together at the Northern Uganda Religious Leaders Peace Initiative, headed by my co-panelist, Archbishop Odama, and joining hands with the national body of the Interreligious Council of Uganda, which was founded in the year 2000. Now, northern Uganda is a safe zone where refugees can seek accommodation, and they are warmly welcomed in northern Uganda. So that is a success story, that northern Uganda, which was once a battlefield, a no-go area, is now the place where people are seeking refuge. So there I begin by first and foremost thanking the efforts of our Secretary General, outgoing Secretary General, Dr. William Vendley, he is the founding father of the Interreligious Council of Uganda in the year 2000. We are very, very, very indebted to this great man for the work he has done to bring about peace in Uganda and in the region and the world over. May God bless him wherever he will be going. In Uganda, you were told I became the Mufti of Uganda in the year 2000. Yes, we had fighting within ourselves as Muslims, factions, the youth, the elderly, the Sunnis, but the Shias are minimal. There was no fighting. We have the Qadianis, who are known as the Ahmadis. But as we talk now, we are living in harmony because we are working together, we are moving together, we are accepting the other and tolerating the other. So within the Muslim community, there is harmony, and we thank God for that. So what we hear about in other countries, that there is war, bloodshed between the Shias and Sunnis, and then there are Sufis, there are others, Qadianis. I think we need to change our mindset as religious leaders to accept everybody in his own or her own way. In the year 2000, when we formed the Interreligious Council of Uganda, we thought that we could work together in resolving conflicts, building peace, and advancing sustainable development. This has been ongoing for the past close to 2 decades. As religious leaders, the body contains 7 membership, who are referred to as presidents. The Uganda Muslim Supreme Council, headed by the Mufti of Uganda, speaking to you now. The Catholic Church of Uganda, headed by the Archbishop Jonah Rwanga, Cyprian Kizito Rwanga, and the Orthodox Church, headed by Jonah Rwanga. There are 2 Rwangas here, that's why the confusion. Then the Anglican Church, or the Church of Uganda, headed by Dr. Stanley Ntagali. The Born Again Faith Community, headed by Apostle Joseph Serwada. Then the Seventh-day Adventist, headed by Pastor Mate, and I think there were 7. So these form a Council of Presidents of the Interreligious Council of Uganda. We are moving together, and there are no frictions between faith organizations. We are living in harmony in Uganda. This is a success story. Can't you clap for that? This is a success story. Currently, as a Muslim, I'm now the chairperson of the Interreligious Council of Uganda for the past 2 years. These brothers, other brothers respect me, and they honor my word, and we have been moving together. Now, we have moved from inter-religion differences, then we are moving to interfaith, we are together. Now, the last stage is moving from religious leaders to other leaders. Those are governments and political leaders and civic leaders. This is the stage where we are. Because within the Muslim community, we don't have problems. Within us, as interreligious leaders, we don't have problems amongst ourselves. So it is now our turn to engage governments, because we feel if we do not engage governments, then our gospel or our mission is destined to fail. So that is where we started. It is not dialogue among ourselves, dialogue between the religious leaders and other stakeholders in the in Uganda with politicians and political leadership. So in the year 2012, we had problem. 2011, during the political and presidential and parliamentary elections, we had problems during the elections. There was some violence taking place. But in the year 2016, we managed to convince the government, the candidates for presidential leadership, and the candidates for parliamentary seats to come under one roof. We organized, as the Interreligious Council of Uganda, the first ever presidential candidates debate, open debate. Like we are sitting here, we brought all the candidates, 8 of them. Outside they were fighting, there was tear gas, but in the conference room, they were shaking hands and smiling at each other. That was a big success. We had 2 rounds. The first round, out of the 8, 7 attended. The incumbent didn't. He was very suspicious, as you saw. What is the motive of the religious leaders? Are they working for the opposition, or they are working for a genuine cause? Until he was convinced, he attended the second presidential debate. It was a peaceful ever exercise of election that passed without, with minimum violence. So here, the religious leaders had a role to play. Now, in the aftermath of the elections, we felt that there is a lot that requires to engage with the politicians, to engage with the government, thus calling for the Uganda National Dialogue. Now, the Uganda National Dialogue, on December 18th, last year, the government of Uganda, under the leadership of Yoweri Museveni, under the working group of 7 organizations, adopted a communique authorizing the convening of the Uganda National Dialogue. The communique was a culmination of 3 years of consultations with citizens and leaders across the country on the need for a national dialogue. The Uganda National Dialogue Coordinating Team, this UNADICOT, was established to spearhead the convening of the Uganda National Dialogue. The emerging consensus on the need for a national dialogue, the modalities for its convening, the agenda, and the modalities for participation are set out in the Uganda National Dialogue process. The Uganda National Dialogue is a mechanism to enable Ugandans to come together, constantly engage in honest and open conversations on how to build a country that works for every citizen. The premise of the Uganda National Dialogue is that when we all come together as citizens and share our aspirations and a vision of the Uganda we want, we are able to build a future that's peaceful and prosperous for ourselves and our children. By embracing the Uganda National Dialogue, we are committed and are committing ourselves to bring together our collective wisdom, energy, diversity, and creativity to pursue a new vision for our country. The vision of the Uganda National Dialogue is a just and a morally upright society founded on social economic justice, shared prosperity, popular governance, and respect for the rule of law. This vision commits us to build a new Uganda that is not just based on our geography, but on equality, respect for human dignity, and a shared pursuit.
I thought you had forgotten me.
You are there. I know you are there. So I'm concluding. I'm just concluding. Respect for human dignity and a shared pursuit of prosperity. Achieving this vision is a collective responsibility, and the National Dialogue is an opportunity to agree on the nature and the scope of that responsibility and the accountability arrangements to ensure that each one of us is playing our part. Now, why the Uganda National Dialogue? We need a society that dialogues, because a society that dialogues builds and succeeds together. We want dialogue for everybody. Let everybody be heard. Not only the government to be heard, let also the local person, the local citizen of the country be heard. Then we have, why the national dialogue? Because Uganda, we have plenty of national resources. And we are the pearl of Africa. One mentioned it, gave us a beautiful and rich country. Uganda is fondly referred to as the pearl of Africa. Globally, the country is celebrated as loving, caring, and full of hospitable people. In addition, Uganda is a land of plenty, teeming with rocks, rich rocks, and conducive environment, and other green forests, and everything that has God given us is celebrated. Now we need also a culture that there is no violence and there is stability in our country. That's why we need dialogue. And we want to build an electoral system that is credible. That's why we need the dialogue. Now, we also need to build bridges and harness our diversity in the Uganda National Dialogue. Now, in conclusion, what we need to do about the dialogue, we have an 8-point agenda which will be concluded by.
Oh, I'm lucky, not the 8 points.
Yes,
Jesus.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Archbishop, who do you feel closer to, the Mufti or me? Will you stay seated or will you move over there? So an example of the cooperation, I guess, of the two of you is also the simple fact that you're both on the stage here and that you both present this very process from your perspective, and we try to figure out what we understand and what we get out of it. So this was the historical process. Now we hear Archbishop John Baptist Odama, and I'm really excited to see where he moves to, if he stays seated or not. He's ordained to Bishop of the Diocese of Nebi in 1996. He's the first Archbishop of Gulu. It seems to me that he's interested in interreligious and peace-building processes. So he mediated between the Ugandan government and the rebels from the Lord's Resistance Army. He was involved in the so-called Juba Talks, which was in 2006 and 2008. He's a member of the board of the Interreligious Council in Uganda. And when I read about him, I understand that he's really experienced in settling conflicts. And I'm interested to see how you put your perspective now onto this national process. Yes, I'm closer to you this way. Let me just tell you, we have another 30 minutes. I would be glad if you could contribute questions. And I guess you talk about maximum 10 minutes. And then we have another 10 minutes here up on the panel. So this is very transparent planning of time, right?
Anyway, moderator, my dear brothers and sisters, whether I'm seated here or I'm at the podium, I would still be with you. I would still be with you. So I choose now. Let me be nearer to the moderator so that she can control me. And I can control her also. Thank you. The Mufti, Mubaji, has presented why there was need for national dialogue. Truly, our solidarity as a nation, now 57 years old, as an independent country, we felt we're not together. There is more stress on either political isolation or cultural or religious, but we have been trying with the interreligious that we are together, at least now with the religious. As Mubaji Mufti has said, there are still many other areas we feel we should talk about. So the agenda for our national dialogue, 8 of them are proposed. Because they have been given 10 minutes, I have the 8 points. So 1 minute for each. And then the last 3, I will have them to conclude my presentation. I've already spent 1 minute. Let us move ahead. The first one. The first agenda is we would like to have a national political consensus. That means we want to have an agenda that we, as people of Uganda, must make about our institutions, especially state institutions, how they work for the promotion of common good. Number 2, national consensus on constitutionalism and the rule of law. Uganda, since its independence, we have had changes of, the constitution. I think now we have 4, if not more. We were ruled by the first constitution, and then 1967, it was changed, and then we became, under Idi Amin, we were being ruled by decree, and then again, after the election of 1985, we got another, 1995, we got another constitution. Now that same constitution is being violated. At the moment, we don't know, are we truly following that? Because in the beginning, we agreed there should be only 2 terms of leadership, 2 terms. Now we have gone to indefinite. We are now in a stage of indefinite. So life president from now, that way, I don't know. And the parliamentarians are also saying ours should also be extended. And everybody. So we said constitution needs to be respected. So we must have a very strong culture of respecting constitution. Number 3, the values. Our values, we don't have enough constitution about it. People seem to go in their own ways. So there is moral crisis triggered by breakdown in values. We would like to see something agreed by the people of Uganda that these are the values we want to see inculcated from our young up to the kept by the eldest. This we would like to see done. And we are going to discuss all this. What are the values that we would like to promote? This is an agenda we are going to look at. Then number 4, we have the National Diversity Consensus. We are 65 tribes in Uganda. Do we all accept we belong to this nation? Each one has a right to this nation as much as a baby in the womb. That is an issue which will have to be looked into. With all the other diversities, we are going to look. Number 5, national consensus on the land, national resources or natural resources, and climate change. We feel that we should really discuss this issue. Why? Because there is issue of grabbing land, displacing people, then the use of the natural resources are somehow not really for the whole common good of the people. And then the climate, we are also interfering with the violation of protecting the environment by deforestation, for example. We said these issues we must discuss and agree to see that we do together. Number 6, agenda, item number 6, a national consensus on an economy that works for everybody. Here is a, we have made some strides, but the opportunities are not the same. The opportunities and the beneficiaries are not the same. We have problem there. Number 7, national consensus on quality of public service delivery. Some areas are better delivered, others are poorly neglected. I put it in a double negative. Maybe it will be positive, but I think it makes the point stronger. Then, item number 8 on our agenda, we have the issue that the consensus about implementation of policies that they are not being fully done. What should we do? What can we direct, especially in regard to our vision in the national development, creating of jobs, and so on? How should we make the huge policy implementation deficit to work? I have gone 7 minutes, if not 8. Now, the last part, let me finish them with this. How are we going to do this? We have already started a preliminary stage to see that the citizens' dialogue, the people at the grassroots, should start talking about their nation, because the nation belongs to them, not to the political leaders. They have started, and they are really very enthusiastic about this. Number 2, political dialogue. We have actually in the national constitution 2 bodies. We call them Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue. This is supposed to bring all the parties together to discuss issues related to the nation. Then we have another one, NCF, which is the National Consultative Forum. This is supposed to be also addressing issues that are related to the nation. But in quite a good number of cases, when they gather, if they gather at all, they divide themselves before they enter the room. So each one says, I will discuss if it is on this topic. So we would like to see that this political dialogue is reinforced, therefore application of the Constitution in that direction. Finally, We have the Sovereign National Conference, which will now bring all the fruits of the discussion at different levels to come and approve them. So there should be a consensus document adopted by the National Dialogue Plenary. And this is what we look forward to at the end of it. The conclusion of conclusion is this one.
That I
Since
can ask
attaining
my
independence, now, I'm just getting this now. That's why we were nearer to each other. So that we can dialogue also, we can make an agreement. But let me go straight.
That's the best trick. You just say the numbers all the time, and you knock me out that way.
Very good. So the key issues pertaining to their destiny, we need to have the destiny of the nation, not the destiny of a party or the destiny of a small section of the population. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. One is, you said that in 2011, before you had this interreligious council, then politicians wanted to join this council. Did I get that right? I'm interested in at what point and how did you integrate the political leaders into your dialogue? How did you get them on your side?
Yes, this one, I said in the year 2011, we have been having elections, presidential elections and parliamentary elections after 5 years. Now, 2001, that one was there. Then there is 2006, 2011. That's when I said the election exercise was marred with violence. Now, here is when the Interreligious Council, the religious leaders, saw that it was necessary to intervene, try to approach everyone involved in the elections, the participants, and also the electorate, the security, the civil society, to see that there is maximum protection of the candidates. That's when we began engaging everyone, including every individual presidential candidate and also the structures, to see that we talk to them, that we need a peaceful and relatively good election.
So that's more or less when you got them into this dialogue.
Exactly.
So now, when you have this dialogue, which you are starting with the 8 points plus the 3 points, Mr. Archbishop, right? Yeah, yeah, I'm on the same page. How do you select political leaders? How do I get on this panel? Who is in there? Who is not in there? Is there a representative from the refugees, for example? How does that work?
To me?
Yes.
Of course, the citizens have the right. The refugees have what we call sympathetic listening ear to them. Am I right? I don't know if you get me. The people who have a right to discuss the issues of the nation, they are the citizens of the nation. But because they are living with the refugees, there will be some issues that may arise from there that the citizens, as they discuss it among themselves, they may bring it because they have a listening ear also to their neighbors. I don't know if I made it more complicated. Have I?
So I want to know who is sitting at the table. I want to know who is allowed to sit there and who not. I guess the 2 of you are sitting there, and who else?
Now, we have not yet selected who are to sit there.
Ach so.
This is a part of the process.
Okay.
Is a part of the process.
Okay, now I got it.
The representatives are going to be elected. If I had more time, I would have explained this better. Yeah. But I was given only 10 minutes.
Unfortunately,
I consumed 1 in introduction, and then 8 or 9, I put them now together Yes, thank you.
We could start a show, the two of us, right? About time, I guess.
Okay.
It would
Okay.
be entertaining.
It's all right. Yes.
My last question is, when I read just some facts about Uganda, I learned that in Uganda you face, just as other countries in Africa as well, in Asia, you face a corruption problem. Does this affect your work in any how? Or how does it affect your work?
Corruption. We have so many terms to describe it in Uganda. Some say corruption is a theft. Corruption is a robbery. Corruption is cheating and all this. Whom do you rob? Whom do you cheat? All these are the people who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of what belongs to them, but is taken by, yesterday somebody was saying, one of the factors that is dangerous is greed. Greed. So you have, when greed overcomes, I think it was the grandfather of this one. Yeah, Gandhi said, the world has enough for everybody. But for the greedy, what the world has is not enough. That is where the problem is. So it is, unfortunately, it has infected many countries in Africa, not only Africa, the world. That is an area, I think, for us, in the interreligious group now like this, is to address.
So now it's your turn. If there are questions in the audience, I think we're allowed to have 3 questions. Okay. Please, the microphone is yours. 1, 2, another one, 3. Here we go. 3 questions, Joshua, right? Yeah. Please start.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Jahangir Sarosh. I'm from United Kingdom. And some of you might have heard about a word called Brexit. We recently carried out a survey there, and the major concern that has been raised related to potential violence is the division that has been caused within the community. Because it is a subtle violence, and because it cannot be identified, you cannot identify it by their religion or their dress or ethnicity, etc. And it is within the families. I would like to hear your suggestions as to what way can we prevent the potential violence. Thank you.
Je voudrais demander à la modératrice de porter son casque parce que je vais parler en français. Portez vos casques. Portez your casque. I want to speak in French.
I don't have any.
You haven't?
Aber vielleicht verstehe ich es ja auch. You need that.
This is important. French is the language of Assembly Mondiale. Today you can speak French. Oui, on doit avoir le droit de parler en français parce que c'est une langue aussi de la conférence mondiale des religions et de la paix. La France est là, la Belgique est là, l'Afrique est représentée. Et plus de 50% des pays africains parlent le français. Je peux y aller? Madame la modératrice, bien, alhamdoulilah rabbil alamin. Je suis Imam Ibrahim Koné. Je suis secrétaire général du Forum national de confession religieuse de Côte d'Ivoire. Je suis donc à cette conférence avec mon président, le révérend pasteur de Moublin Jacob, accompagné de la représentante des femmes du Forum. Le problème des réfugiés est dû souvent aux élections mal préparées. Il faut reconnaître que dans tous les pays du monde, et particulièrement en Afrique, les élections sont très très mal préparées. C'est pourquoi, après les élections, il y a toujours des gens qui quittent le pays et pour revenir, ça devient un problème. Il y en a souvent même qui sont réfugiés dans leur propre pays. Donc je voulais que la conférence mondiale des régions de la paix puisse aider tous les États du monde, particulièrement les États africains, à ce que les élections soient bien préparées. Mais pour que les élections soient bien préparées, il faut que les politiques soient à l'écoute des religieux. Nous avons constaté, surtout en Afrique, que les politiques, ils s'en foutent des religieux. Ils font ce qu'ils veulent, mais quand ça se gâte, on appelle maintenant les religieux pour venir réparer. Alors les religieux doivent arrêter d'être des pompiers. Nous devons être en avant pour préparer, pour parler aux politiques, pour que tout se passe dans de bonnes conditions. Il y a certains pays africains, en 2019, il y a plein d'élections. Mais il y a 2 pays africains particulièrement où il y a des problèmes actuellement. On ne sait pas ce qui va se passer. Mais il faudrait que les politiques acceptent que les religieux rentrent dans le jeu maintenant. Mais pas après, parce qu'on ne veut pas être des pompiers. On veut travailler à la source, à la base, pour aider le pays à avancer, pour éviter qu'il y ait des réfugiés après les élections. Parce qu'une élection, elle se prépare. Voilà ce que je voulais dire. Merci.
Hi, I'm Meher from India. I have a question. So we've been discussing a lot about war refugees, and I think going forward we'll also have a lot of climate refugees. So what are the thoughts of religious leaders on and off the dais on the issue of population? Because usually, at least in my country, I do not hear religious leaders talking about addressing the issue of population. In fact, it's more like they prefer to have more of their own tribe growing, but eventually the earth has limited resources, and that's going to affect us going forward.
Thank you. If you put your questions very short, I'd be grateful, and then we can squeeze in 5, right?
Okay.
So.
My name is Rifat, Father Rifat Beder from Jordan. Miss Gandhi, your family's name is related always to the non-violence. After the two decades of the 21st century, we saw a lot of people, thousands of young people who were fascinated by the terrorist groups. How we can encourage the young people in the 21st century to re-experience the beauty of non-violence? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Evelyn Falk. I have 2 questions, one to the gentleman that gave the first speech. It is very interesting, the labor you are doing. However, I am sad to see that conflicts in America are overseen, as well as the refugee problem. Why are we, the Latin Americans, doing something wrong that the world community is ignoring our problems? Mrs. Gandhi. Your organization works with volunteers. How do you train and get these volunteers? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm
Dear-
sorry we said 5, and you squeezed in, if I may say that.
Very short, 1 sentence. Dear Archbishop John Baptist Udama, how do you handle the demandment of our Lord Jesus Christ in the Sermon on the Mount? Do not take care on your future in Uganda and in Germany. God will take care for you. So that the topic of our assembly here, caring for our common future, is in some way against Jesus Christ. Because he said, not trust in God, but God will take care for you. How do you handle that?
Yes, but they have to answer the questions, and then I'm asking for the person to come on stage, right? Okay, so we will try to answer the questions, and this is also then the final round of our panel. And then we come to the last point of this morning's session, the action point. Brexit, division in the community, what potential, how can we avoid potential violence, right? Do you have the microphone? Yeah.
I think when we deal with the issues of violence, the first point is that there are usually early warning signs. And you can, if we are alert and we look at what are these signs, in which area there's going to be potential violence or, disagreements and so on. If we begin to learn to recognize those early warning signs, then we can make an intervention and look at how we can handle it with nonviolence. I think that question also deals with the other issue.
Yeah, the beauty of nonviolence, the gentleman said.
So nonviolence basically is about discussing issues, about learning to communicate in a nonviolent way so that we're not accusing somebody of issues, of talking in a way that respects each other's dignity, and to open up places for dialogue with each other. So very briefly, I mean, nonviolence is a huge issue. There are hundreds of books that I can refer you to. And, but just briefly, that is the thing. Firstly, you must recognize early warning signs. Secondly, deal with those early warning signs in a nonviolent way to open up dialogue and open up spaces where people can have discussions and resolve the things that are in their minds.
So then the question to you was volunteers. How do you recruit them, I believe, right?
In South Africa, we have a huge thrust to encourage volunteerism. In fact, Mr. Mandela's birthday is a day of volunteerism. On that day, we attract people to come and provide voluntary service. So in our communities, there is that idea of volunteerism, which has been encouraged from the days of our struggle and even now. So I think it's just to develop that notion of volunteerism and then begin to bring people together, train them, give them jobs. You can't just get a volunteer and leave them without anything to do, because then they become disgruntled. They feel that it's not worth their while. So make the job attractive, bring them together, give them knowledge, and then they can get on and do the work. Thank you.
Dominic Barge, so climate refugees and why do we always ignore Latin Americans in one sentence?
Thank you. In fact, I would like to answer both to Côte d'Ivoire and Latin America. No, you're not ignored at all. In fact, I think there is a very clear recognition that the big countries of asylum in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America, they really bear the main burden, if you will. They have the largest number of refugees hosted. And they're also, and many people don't know that, they're also much more generous than even the Refugee Convention foresaw. Whereas an individual asylum seeker has to present his case to the authorities and he may or may not get refugee status, a refugee from Somalia in Kenya does not have to explain himself because everybody in Kenya knows there's a war next door. Come, you're safe. And that notion also applies in Latin America. Today, the millions of refugees fleeing from violence in Venezuela, they find protection next door. They don't have to go through complicated procedures because everybody understands these are our brothers and sisters. And I think here we also need to acknowledge that these refugee systems in Africa, the OAU Convention and the Cartagena Agreement, that they really provide for a very welcoming state, and we now have to be sure that the international community supports that in a very sustained way. One quick word on Côte d'Ivoire and the involvement of refugees as we gear up for political change, for elections. Very, very important. And in fact, it is religious leaders who have always played a primary role in making sure that refugees are involved in processes back home. So when the Darfuri sheikhs who are now found refuge in Chad, when they are discussing peace negotiations for Darfur, it is the Darfuris in Chad who sit at the table. And I think that is very, very important, and I fully endorse your statement. Climate refugees, it is a bit of a...
Maybe you can do this bilaterally, sorry,
Okay,
but
fine.
we have this last question, and you can maybe do it bilaterally about the God will take care of you. Mr. Archbishop, I think you wanted to answer this very simple, very complicated theological question in a sentence.
There is a saying, God takes care of those who care for themselves.
So, sorry for the climate refugees. We are, time is running. Thank you for this panel. We tried to give you some input and some ideas of the what and of the how to have a just and harmonious society. We now come to the last point of this morning session. It's the action point, and I would like to ask Sheikh Hamza Youssef to join us. Is he here? There he is. Da kommt er schon, super. He will present the action points on the Alliance of Virtue. Sheikh Hamza is a renowned Islamic scholar, founded and is the president of Zaytuna College in Berkeley in California. He's also the vice president of the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies. And if I'm right, then he will read out the points, and you, by clapping or being silent, give your answer. So if you clap, then it's accepted, and the council will have to consult about it. If you keep silence, then they probably have to rethink about the whole point.
Thank you.
That's your part now. Thank
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. First of all, it's a great honor to be here in the presence of so many extraordinary religious leaders. I want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Bill Venley, who introduced me to this organization, but also through his own display of incredible effort at bringing religions for peace to the forefront of the consciousness of many people, because too often our religions are seen as sources of the problem. Jonathan Swift said that we have just enough religion to hate, but not enough religion to love one another. And it would seem to me that this auditorium, it really negates that. But the difference and the love that's in this room is because of the religious literacy that's represented in this room. So it's not that there's too much religion in the world. There's actually too little religion in the world, which gets to the very source of what this is about. Because after the extraordinary devastation of the two world wars that our species experienced in the last century, a phoenix arose out of the ashes, which was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was actually conceived by a group of people that recognized that we had to do something about these immense abuses. They actually solicited from all over the world. Mahatma Gandhi participated in that. He actually offered a Hindu understanding of what came to be known as human rights. The great architect of the Declaration, Charles Malik, a Greek Orthodox, informed by his spirituality, was somebody who recognized that this could not be a Western declaration. The great Chinese Confucianist, Peng Chang, who also participated and was central to the Declaration, was somebody who would constantly dispel the tension in the room by bringing an analect of Confucius into the room. So our religions and our traditions have this capacity. We can differ about our concept of the divine and our understandings, but what we share is our understanding of virtue, of goodness, and of beauty. And this is why the Quran in Surah Al-Ma'idah says, each of you we have given a distinct way and a path. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شَرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. And had the divine wished to make you all one religion, God would have. but in order to test you in what each of you has been given. And then the Quran says, so vie in virtue. Vie in virtue. And this is why we need our religious traditions to bring forth a declaration of virtue, of what we share in common universally, our shared virtues. Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyah, my own teacher, is asking for an alliance of virtue. And so this call to action is a call that states respectful of human dignity, which the religions understand to be rooted in the sacred and protected by rights, mindful that the world's religious and other traditions, the cultivation of virtues is central way of unfolding rights-protected human dignity to become a good and integrally developed person. Further, mindful that the world's religions and other virtue traditions have great heritages of civic virtues that orient persons towards building good and just societies, and that the world's religions recognize specific religious virtues as valuable in cultivating states of mercy, compassion, and love. Cognizant that there is a great overlap amongst the major virtues of the religious and other virtue traditions, the Assembly is invited to affirm the following motion: that the Religions for Peace 10th World Assembly mandate the World Council to develop an alliance of virtue based on a declaration of virtues widely shared across religious traditions and other virtue heritages, and to develop as part of such a declaration individual introductions from each participating religion and virtue school engaged. It's not as loud a clap as I would have hoped for.
Maybe you can just repeat the last paragraph, because I think it's very intense and then one can follow better. Maybe you can just read it out again a little bit slower, and then people can think if they like to clap or not.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, that the Religions for Peace 10th World Assembly mandate the World Council to develop an alliance of virtue based on a declaration of virtues widely shared across religious traditions and other virtue heritages, and to develop as part of such a declaration individual introductions from each participating religion and virtue school engaged.
They got it. That's great.
That was much better. So thank you, and God bless all of you. At the height of the tragic past century, a great poet said that defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies. Yet ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange messages. May we, like them composed of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. I see a great affirming flame in this room. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention, for your questions, for your listening, and for the participation here on the panel. Thank you.